So this is the intake manifold itself once it's out. The way this fits together, you've got the throttle body mounted on the front, which is going to be sitting there like that. Standard butterfly valve. You can open these clips up. It's actually dry inside. I just wanted to see if there was actually any grease or anything like that that needed to be replaced, but you don't need to do anything like that. It's a plug at the front, top and bottom. It's actually quite tight, and you have to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. It's one of the more difficult things to actually get that off. And there are 4 Torx bolts that just attach to that. They're pretty easy to remove. Once that is out, then you can start on the rest of it, disconnect everything like I've already talked about. The thing that actually holds the ends together, you've got a big seal that actually goes between the two. So it's actually going to wrap around that, and it's going to wrap around the end there. And the thing that's actually holding that together is this thing. So each end, and the way this is orientated is there are obviously 2 halves to it that come apart quite happily. There's a little notch that goes into the hole there, and that's going to be at the back of the engine, so the throttle body end, and on the other end, which has got the little flange up here, that is going to be at the front, and there's a single screw that goes there. So it's pretty easy to remove the screw. These are actually going to be stuck pretty hard down on there. So you'll actually need to sort of pull that up pretty hard, and then the one at the bottom, you'll actually have to push pretty hard down and maybe give that a good thump to actually get that clear, because you need to get that. And underneath it, there's actually not much room, so you'll have to wiggle that a little bit to get that clear. And then comes sort of the more difficult bit, and that's actually getting these seals off, because they're in there quite solidly. They are they're not hard, but they are not really pliable, and they're stuck in there pretty hard. So you'll need to sort of get your fingers underneath here, and what you want to do is actually get it off one side and then on the other side, so that can actually remove. This will actually be sitting there sort of just like that, so that can actually just slide straight up. But the problem is actually getting it off, especially on the underside where you can't actually get your hands around there very easily, is actually quite difficult. What I ended up doing was before I pulled this out, I actually loosened all the screws here, which actually enabled this to wiggle a bit, so then I could actually get my hands in here and get that a little bit freer to pull the whole thing out. If I was just removing the intake plenum only, maybe I'd persevere, but to be honest, the seals on the bottom of the intake manifold itself are going to be reusable. They say to change them, but these are nice and pliable. They're not going to be a problem to reuse those. So I would go right ahead and actually just loosen those off so you can actually get that seal free. And once you've got that seal free, then the whole thing can come up. The boot that goes to the throttle body looks like this. There's just a big pipe clamp on either end. The smaller ones that go on the sides here. It's asymmetric, so make sure you take notice of which way it comes in because of the angle of the engine, because obviously it's not perfectly symmetric because the cylinders are staggered. The actual intake plenum comes in a funny angle, which means that actually needs to be kind of like that. The intake plenum itself, the S model has the variable bellows or the variable intake geometry. So it's just a little flapper valve on the inside here. So if you actually just move the bellows, let me see if I can move that thing. So you've just got a vacuum line, that solenoid that we looked at before, electrical connector on the top, and then just fires vacuum to that to make that work. Other than that, it's just 2 chambers that when that is deactivated, they're both going to be open. When it's activated, that thing's actually going to be closed. The connection points for the bottom of the intake manifold, there are 6 screws on each side, 2 around each intake. The ones in the middle aren't too bad. You'll need a long extension and probably a universal joint, but especially the ones on the ends, they are pretty difficult to get access to. So you'll need to get a couple of tools, some universal joints to get access to those, loosen those off, and then a magnetic tool in there to get them out, and the same in reverse to install it. On the left hand side of the intake manifold, obviously I've disconnected the plenum chain, but I've just put this in loosely here just to show you what actually needs to be disconnected. At the back here, there's going to be this bracket which is going to be connected to the actual intake manifold on this side. There are two connection points there and there. There's one down the side here, which is a little bit difficult to get access to, so I found an 8mm socket. An 8mm ring spanner was the one that actually worked particularly well there to sort of get in there and get that off. Otherwise, all of these are just a standard e-Torx. There's that connection there, which also connects to that part there, which is the conduit for all the cabling. There'll be a plug there. This is the line for the carbon canister, so the fuel vent valve. To disconnect that, there's just a press on the other side of that, so press that and then just disconnect that. In addition to that, you'll have this one over this side, which is going to be just screwed into that, and that can be just moved away. That plug, that one there, goes into that vent valve, and that one there goes into the solenoid, which is going to be for the variable intake, for the variable geometry on the intake plenum. In addition to that, you can see there's this is the vacuum line. There's one plug there. That's the one that actually goes into the solenoid for the variable intake geometry plenum, or that little bellows there. What I found was the line actually goes to the solenoid, and then there's another line that actually goes to the bellows. I found this is the easiest one to disconnect. So you actually pull off you disconnect the solenoid from the plenum chamber here, and if you twist that back and forth, that'll eventually work its way free. I found the others really, really difficult to remove. This is the vacuum line that goes down to the back. That goes down to the two solenoids which are just in here, which control the cooling to the PDK transmission. On the bottom of the intake plenum, there are a couple of clips like this. So this will actually be clipped to it. So when you remove the intake plenum, what you want to do is just lift it up and then just grab your hands underneath here and just pop those free. And so that can actually come loose, so you can remove the intake plenum. On the right hand side, the disconnection points are this one back here, which is going to be there. That's again just for that cabling conduit. There's a bracket here which holds onto, there's actually this black plastic bit that actually just holds onto the two pipes that come out of the air conditioning compressor. So you can just disconnect that, and that will then just slide away to give you a little bit more room to move that out. At the back here, there is a cable. That's actually the vacuum line. That's just going to be going through that little loop that sort of gets pressed together and clamps around it just to hold it in place. So you can just easily open that up. It's got a couple of little barbs. You open those, and the thing just sort of pops straight open. You've got an electrical connector here in the back, which is for I think this is the temperature sensor for the engine bay. A connection point on the intake plenum, you'll have this little line, which is from the fuel tank vent carbon canister. So you just squeeze those together, and then that just wiggles straight off. You'll have a connection pipe that actually runs from here over to the oil separator. So you just need to squeeze that in and just wiggle that off. They're pretty tight, just to pull that off. And there'll be one on the oil separator at the other side of the engine, the front left of the engine. I actually removed that just to get that out of the way, because otherwise it sits over the front here and it's a real pain to get your hands around. So I just removed that completely. There'll be a plug here. I think this is, I'm not sure exactly what the sensor is, but it's probably something to do. This doesn't actually have a mass airflow sensor, so I'm assuming it's some sort of temperature, pressure combination sensor. Don't really know, but that needs to be disconnected. Other connection points at the back, you'll have these clips here, which is for the line that goes to the coolant bleeder valve. You'll have there's a connection, just a plug here. This is the solenoid for the bellows, the variable bellows. And so to actually get this off, there's a clip underneath the bottom of the solenoid. So you're going to push that in and that just pops straight off. So underneath it, you're going to pull that forward, which is sort of in that direction. And then that vacuum line is going to be connected to that. So I'm going to have it, it's going to be sitting there like this, and I'll just wiggle it back and forth, holding onto the hose underneath it, and eventually that will just pop straight off. And before you remove the thing, then you can actually push that back down there. So with the electrical plug and the vacuum line disconnected, then you can put that back on there, and that just stays with it as you remove it out of the car. Some additional connections over the other side here. On that bracket that sits there, there's a tab there, and that is going to hold onto the little valve just there. So you can actually that just slots into a rubber sort of slot. You just pull that off to allow that whole thing to come free. In addition to that, you'll have the oil separator pipe, which is going to the intake manifold, which is where all that oil comes from that actually creates the problem in the first place. That's just going to be clipped on there, so you can pull that off and actually just remove that pipe completely. It just looks like that. Same connection on both sides, just so I could free up a bit of access at the back there. Getting this clip off here for the pipe for the oil separator is a bit hard because the clip is down the side here. So just grab hold of it like that and twist it around. It'll expose that. And if you have some tool like that, you just put it in there like that, and then you can just wiggle that free pretty easily. This big thing here, that's the cable that goes to the park lock on the transmission, so it just sits over the top. You can see there's a fair bit of slack in it, so you can actually move it to the side, and that's to enable you to actually get the intake plenum out. I've been trying a few things to try and work out an easier way of actually getting what they call a resonance tube out, which is this thing here. So a couple of things that I've done. I've just removed the connection points here, backlift there, like basically on each side, to move everything out of the way. I've got a tie down strap, and I've pulled the parking cable off to the side so I can actually lift that clear. I have removed the tube for the oil separator, so I've completely removed that. I have disconnected the tank vent valve over here and just pulled it off the side and cable tied it here. I've also just jammed that the coolant bleeder line that normally goes in there. I've sort of shoved it up there, make sure that's sitting up so it doesn't have any coolant that's going to drip out of it. This is the fuel tank vent line here. I've actually pulled it and cable tied it. There's actually a large red cable. It's just I think it's positive that then ends up going to the alternator from the battery. Just cable tie it to that and actually keep that clear of the bellows here. If you've got a car that doesn't have this is actually going to be pretty simple. Then you can actually just disconnect the rubber boot that goes around the throttle, disconnect the connection point or the cable or the electrical plug that goes to the throttle, and then you can just rotate it up and out after you've disconnected the two straps on either side. And then what you can do is actually pull the rubber boots up and off and sort of rotate them around, and they will end up just being put here, so you've got that gap down each one. And then with the non-S model, or without the bellows, you'll actually just be able to rotate up and just pull that straight out. With this one, because you've got a bunch of room here, you can actually just move that forward. And then once that's out, you can actually rotate that out that way really easily. And obviously you're going to put it back in the same way. When you're putting it in, I found that you get it to there, just sort of line it up and just sort of wiggle it, and it'll eventually just plonk itself back in there. And trust me, that is 100 times easier than pulling the boot out at the back and the throttle off individually. But obviously you need to get everything clear here to actually rotate that up and out. One of the hardest parts of this was actually getting the cable or the harness connection here at the bottom of the throttle. Probably the best way I found to do it was because you've got to get quite a lot of pressure on the bottom and top of it, and then push it that way, is to actually get your one hand underneath there like that, another one down, and then just wiggle, 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 and eventually it'll push out the other side and have it clear. So when getting these straps on and off, to get it on, on this side here, have it basically in that position there. Lower the resonance tube down. Have, obviously, that's going to be sitting over there. Then we're going to move that across, make sure we wiggle that around. And then getting in this into position is going to be fairly difficult. It's really tight fit because of the oil filler tube underneath. What I found the best way to do it is to get that bit over there like that, and then you're going to lift it up and sort of just wiggle it into position, and that's going to be right. Getting it out as well, it's basically the reverse of that. What I found when I first removed these, they were really stuck in there. So what I do is just give that a jiggle up and down to try and loosen everything. It's not going to hurt it. It's only attached to the back. At the front, it's just the solenoid that's connected to the vacuum line underneath it, which can quite happily move up and down. So give that a jiggle to get that removed. When you're installing on this side, getting the bolts in for the intake manifold, make it a bit easier. It's on just a rubber grommet there, that temperature sensor that just sits in there. Just pull that straight up and out, and that's actually going to free up a bit of room here. With the four inside bolts are actually relatively simple. To get access to the one down here, this is what I'm using. That is an E10 E-Torx. That one, I'm actually going to, there's a clip down here which holds onto that vacuum line. Disconnect that and sort of push everything out of the way, and you can actually just easily get access down here. And out the back here, you've got this big cable, or the electrical harness. There are actually two of them here. go in between them. Trying to push it to the side is really, really hard, but if you actually go between it, you can get access quite happily to that front one. On this side, getting to the screws down the bottom wasn't so bad for all the 5 here, but the front one, because this bank is actually pushed a fair bit further forward, it's pretty hard to get access to the one here. So I just use this tool like that, which is just a little jobber on a drill. This is just an impact driver, but you can just control it nice and slowly, and you can actually come in from the front and get access to that easily. Torques for everything here. You've got 4 Newton meters for the clamps. For the screws that hold on the distribution unit at the ends here down onto the head, they all take 13 Newton meters. The torquing sequence is from front to back, starting on the left, it says, okay, and then do those on the right from front to back. So this is how I'm cleaning it out. I've got each of the intakes covered except for the one that I'm cleaning. I'm just going to put a whole bunch of brake cleaner in it. So it's pooling in the bottom. And with that intake valve closed, it's going to just pool there and stay there. I've just got a paintbrush, put a little bit of bend in it, and all I'm going to do is just come in here and just wiggle it around. And just clean it all up. It'll take a little bit of time. The stuff that's only lightly coated will come off pretty easily, but the stuff, especially on the valve stem, seems to be a little bit more difficult to get rid of. And what you might need to do is just gently get in there with a screwdriver, because it softens it up. It actually sort of goes like a bit of a paste, and this will sort of just scrape it off, and then you can just get the brush in there and it'll clean it all up. And to get all that brake cleaner out, I've just got a syringe with a small tube connected to the bottom of it. I'm going to put that all the way down into the well where all the fluid is. And just suck all that out. And instead of blowing it out and just having gunk go everywhere, I found that this is actually much cleaner. I've still got everything covered, so I don't get, well, because I'm going to blow it out shortly, but it just stops all that fluid coming out and just covering everything. The whole car is covered in sheets and everything because it's pretty filthy, but that's at least going to make it as clean as possible. And finally, I'm just going to get some compressed air. I'm going to cover up that intake that I'm doing, blow it so it doesn't blow all the fluid everywhere, and then give it a good blow and clean it afterwards. When you're doing the cleaning of the intake ports, you obviously need the intake valves closed. Most of them are going to be closed, but you might have 1 or 2 that are open. So you need to be able to rotate the crank, and getting access to anything down here so you can rotate it is really, really hard. There's actually a little cover over the generator pulley here, which you can pop off, and on the inside, unusually, there's actually not just a straight nut which connects it to the shaft. It looks like there's this little Bendix or little Sprag clutch unit in here. The inside spline of that is actually an M10 triple square. So if I try and turn it clockwise, which is actually the direction of rotation, as you can see, it's not actually going to, right? I can actually see it turning the generator inside, but it's not actually turning the actual pulley itself. because it's not turning in that, or won't allow it to turn in that direction. Whereas if I go the other way, it will actually turn over the crank. So the way I would suggest you do it is, when you first open everything up, have a look at what's open and what's closed. Go and clean the ones that are closed correctly, and then go and turn this as required to close the ones that aren't, so you can actually not have everything go down into the cylinders when you're cleaning. To get access to the pulley and the bit on the inside there, it's got this seal which is pressed in. It's actually metal backed, and it actually clips in around the outside. It's actually really difficult to get out. What I ended to do, because the center portion is rubber, I actually just sort of tore that out and then got a pick tool in underneath it there to actually pop that out, to get out of that, and I'll just repair that or replace it. But obviously that needs to be fixed up. You want to keep that nice and clean inside there, but that's the way to get that out. And all I've done to fix that up is I've just plonked that piece out of the middle in there, and I've just put a couple of layers of cloth electrical tape, which just sticks like crazy to that, and that should hold that in place. I'm just going to pop that straight in there.